What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, I'm going to be going over some of my favorite wide receivers to target in this year's draft. Yesterday, I went over my top 5 running backs that are my favorite draft picks, and in today's video, I'm going over 4 must-own wide receivers you should be aware of heading into your 2021 draft. Before I do get into the video, though, just a quick shout out and reminder that if you do enjoy the content that we're putting out, show your support by hitting that like button. For those of you that don't know, we are on the road to 100,000 subscribers. Our goal is to hit that by the start of the NFL season, and with your help, we can make that a reality. So if you are somebody that does enjoy our content, watches it regularly, hit that like button, and if you aren't subscribed, consider subscribing today. Also, guys, be advised that our draft packages are currently available now, so if you are looking for our tier-based rankings, want access to all of our sleepers, our targets, our busts, video player breakdowns on all draftable players, an invite to our private Discord community, and more, you can gain access to all of those benefits at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. With that being said, it's time to hop over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which quarterback with at least 100 third down pass attempts had the best completion rate on third down. The correct answer was actually Josh Allen. Congratulations to Rob40Mil, who is the first to get this right on YouTube. And as for Twitter, at CalDoggo69. Once again, congratulations to both of you. But as for today's stat of the day, Derrick Henry led the league in 2020 with 2.8 yards after contact per attempt. Which running back actually ranked second behind him, coming in with 2.4 yards after carry per attempt? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Without further ado, let's hop right into the video. And as per usual, we'll begin with the player listed in the thumbnail. So we'll begin with Robert Woods of the LA Rams. Each and every season, it seems like if you're trying to extract value from a draft, especially at the wide receiver position, the first player you should be looking towards is Robert Woods. Once again, for 2021, this is no different. Robert Woods is currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 19 on most platforms, but the earliest I've ever seen him taken is the wide receiver 17. That right off the bat screams value to a player who's finished in the past 3 seasons, dating back to 2018 as the wide receiver 11, the wide receiver 14 in 2019, and rounding out the 2020 season, finishing as the wide receiver 13. That was on the back of 129 targets, 90 receptions, 936 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns. Robert Woods, the way that he gets his production has always been in the form of volume, a player who received 129 targets a season ago, but when looking at how consistent he's been at receiving that target market share, he's been very consistent since being an LA Ram. Over the past 3 seasons, he's received no fewer than 129 targets and no more than 139, proving that no matter what changes happen to this team offensively, Robert Woods is still going to secure his own individual role. This team, since being under the tutelage of Sean McVay, the head coach of the LA Rams, has always had a target funnel benefiting the wide receivers in this offense, and even though Matthew Stafford is slated to be the quarterback over Jared Goff this season, that in no way, shape, or form hinders the safety or upside of Robert Woods. In fact, it enhances it. Unless you guys have been sleeping under a rock, you know that Matthew Stafford has been getting glowing reports out of the LA Rams camp, and Matthew Stafford heading into 2021 is seen as a major upgrade for this team's offense. Robert Woods, a player typically known for his safety, is also a player that could bring in additional upside this season, upside that we may not have seen in previous seasons with Robert Woods. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say that the reason that Robert Woods probably isn't as highly targeted as he should be in drafts comes down to the way that he gets his points. He is on the more safe side of wide receiving targets. He is the player that you're looking for as your wide receiver 2, and despite finishing as a wide receiver 11 or wide receiver 13, which technically is a back-end wide receiver 1, it's undeniable that owning Robert Woods definitely feels like you're owning a high-end wide receiver 2 at best. While Robert Woods is no stranger to putting up double-digit performances, something that we look for and require out of our wide receiver 2s in our starting lineups, drafting Robert Woods with the expectation that he's going to be putting up 20-point plus games every now and then is just an unrealistic expectation. While he is a player that's unlikely to dud on a week-by-week basis, and that is valuable, maybe if you drafted a player that lacks a bit of upside but has a bit more safety in the early rounds, then Robert Woods may not be the ideal player you're looking to pair with that draft pick. Regardless, due to the sheer fact that we have him ranked as the wide receiver 16 and he's coming off the board in most drafts as the wide receiver 19 or later, Robert Woods, being as safe as he is going to be a benefit to most teams, which is why we have him as a must-own wide receiver and the perfect selection you're wanting in your wide receiver 2 role. With that being said, we move over from a player that we believe is one of the most safe picks in the draft. Now let's give you a player that we believe has massive upside compared to where he's going in drafts. So the next player up was also a player on the thumbnail, Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Aiyuk is coming off of a phenomenal rookie season overshadowed by rookie Justin Jefferson, who received over 1,400 receiving yards in 2020. But looking at Brandon Aiyuk's more modest numbers, but for what he was able to do as just a rookie in fantasy football, his successes should not be understated. Brandon Aiyuk in just 12 games had 96 targets, converted that into 60 receptions for 748 receiving yards to go along with 5 receiving touchdowns. It didn't end there. He still also received 6 rush attempts on the ground. Very successful in that area too. But the most amazing part about his rush attempts in 2020 was that he was able to convert 2 of them into rushing touchdowns. Extrapolating his 12-game performance over a 16-game season, and you have a receiver who would finish the season with 80 receptions, over 1,100 scrimmage yards, and even being able to put up 9 to 10 touchdowns across the season. Now, believe me, if those were the numbers that Brandon Aiyuk put up in his rookie season, then everybody would be all about drafting him this year. Unfortunately, he did only play in 12 games, and many people are using that as a reason not to draft him where he's going. Currently, Brandon Aiyuk is coming off the board as the wide receiver 27, which is incredible value if you think about it. Brandon Aiyuk, his first year in that offense, just as a rookie, was performing as the wide receiver 16 in points per game. On top of that, Brandon Aiyuk is a receiver who had an 88th percentile success for both man coverage as well as press coverage, proving to anybody paying attention that his rookie dominance was all but just a fluke. Brandon Aiyuk is in line to see even more opportunities heading into year 2 in this offense, and many people who are not fans of drafting Brandon Aiyuk in the 2021 fantasy draft are quick to bring up Deebo Samuel as a possible detractor. I personally believe Deebo Samuel is the type of player to help move the chains downfield, opening up more scoring opportunities for Brandon Aiyuk, mitigating any potential loss in production he would lose by having Deebo Samuel on the field for fantasy. For those of you that straight up think that Deebo Samuel is a more talented receiver than Brandon Aiyuk, then I'll just pretty much let you know that you're alone on that island. Head coach Kyle Shanahan has already given him massive praise, even comparing him to Hall of Fame receiver Isaac Bruce. Deebo Samuel, along with many other wide receivers, were polled and asked which wide receiver is the most talented on the offense, and everybody, including Deebo Samuel, was quick to point out Brandon Aiyuk as the most talented receiver. Don't get me wrong, I love Deebo, I love his play style, I like that he's basically a running back at the wide receiver position, and that definitely has a room on the San Francisco 49ers offense, but if you want the player that's the most safe in this offense, with the biggest opportunity to advance in 2021, then look no further than Brandon Aiyuk in the upcoming fantasy draft. Alright guys, so far we've given you a receiver that can be drafted within the top 20, then after that we gave you a receiver that can be drafted within the top 30, so what do you think is next? That's right, a receiver that can be drafted within the top 40. The next wide receiver we have on the list of must-own wide receivers for 2021 is none other than Curtis Samuel of the Washington football team. Earlier on in this offseason, we did our free agent prediction episode where we predicted where free agent wide receivers would land and which landing spots would be the best possible for fantasy. With Curtis Samuel being one of the top free agent wide receivers, also being one of the most versatile, finding a landing spot for him was definitely a tricky subject. We chose the Washington football team as the best possible landing spot, and considering the fact that he actually landed there, so it should be of no wonder as to why we have Curtis Samuel as a must-own wide receiver for the 2021 season. A lot of it definitely does come down to his draft day price tag. Like I had mentioned, he can be drafted within the top 40. He's actually the type of player that could fall outside the top 40 because his ADP is currently exactly the wide receiver 40. That means if this player even falls in the slightest in fantasy drafts, he can now be nabbed outside of the top 40, which is pretty crazy to think because we actually have him ranked 7 spots higher as the wide receiver 33. For starters, Curtis Samuel has been extremely productive in a minimal role over the past 2 seasons, receiving 105 targets in the 2019 season and following that up in 2020 with 97 targets, finishing as the wide receiver 25 in PPR leagues. Pretty crazy to think that Curtis Samuel in a minimal role in the 2020 season, heading into 2021, he should see a more expanded role in this new offense. Curtis Samuel himself is an exceptional athlete, actually ranking in the 100th percentile, coming in with a 40-yard dash time of 4.31. It doesn't end there though, he also has a 92nd percentile height adjusted speed score, and at 5'11", 196 pounds, there's no way you can call him an all that small wide receiver. Curtis Samuel proved to be the type of receiver to get it done on a minimal amount of volume, like I had mentioned, under 100 targets just a season ago. So to finish as the wide receiver 25, despite being on an offense with 2 other receivers named Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore playing ahead of you, likely receiving more targets and more consistent volume throughout the season, yet despite that that you were still able to finish as a top 25 wide receiver. So Curtis Samuel playing third fiddle on an offense when it comes to target market share. So Curtis Samuel definitely deserves your respect, especially for doing that on an offense that ranked bottom 12 when it comes to total passing volume. And even though he is heading to a team that's also going to be bottom 12 in total volume and total opportunities, Curtis Samuel finds himself in a role where he's not going to be playing third fiddle. He is still going to be playing behind Terry McLaurin, the alpha wide receiver 1 in this offense. But don't get it mistaken, this team has a desperate need to fill behind Terry McLaurin in this offense, as seen by J.D. McKissic, a running back in this offense who just a season ago received over 110 targets. Expect much of that passing volume to make its way over to Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel will in turn get a much more consistent target market share than he had a season ago. And with Ryan Fitzpatrick slated to be the Washington football team starter at the quarterback position, a quarterback who historically has heavily targeted the wide receiver position, all signs are looking up for Curtis Samuel in 2021. It's crazy to think that this type of receiver can be drafted outside of the top 40 in some cases, but even if you get him where he currently falls in drafts at the wide receiver 40 spot, like I had mentioned, you're still getting a great value. We have him ranked as the wide receiver 33, so even if you get Curtis Samuel where he's currently falling in drafts, consider yourself getting a player with great value. But let's move on to the next guy. So in today's video, we've given you a wide receiver that can be drafted within the top 20. We've given you a wide receiver in the top 30 and top 40. So what's left to do but to give you an early round wide receiver, a target you can get inside the top 12. The wide receiver we're talking about, of course, is Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears, a player we've been very high on over the past few seasons, but in no way, shape, or form has he disappointed our expectations. Allen Robinson has been a stable target for us over the past 2 seasons, and like I mentioned, he hasn't disappointed, finishing as a top 10 wide receiver in each of the past 2 seasons. In 2019, he finished as the wide receiver 7. That was on the back of 255 fantasy points, 154 targets, converting that into 98 receptions for 1,147 receiving yards to go along with 7 receiving touchdowns. Now the following season, last season, 2020, he actually finished the year with more fantasy points than he had in 2019, where he actually finished as the wide receiver 7, but due to the increased depth at the wide receiver position, Allen Robinson, with more fantasy points, actually finished as the wide receiver 9. What's most important to me, rather than getting overly caught up with where he finished in his end of season production, definitely has to be in how involved he's been in this offense as a wide receiver target. Last season, Allen Robinson, for the second season in a row, actually finished with over 150 targets, and just to tell you guys how impressive that actually is from a volume perspective, only 3 receivers in the 2020 season, including Allen Robinson, actually finished with 150 targets or more. Those receivers in 2020 were DeAndre Hopkins coming in with 160 and Stephon Diggs coming in with 166, and as we know, those are absolutely elite wide receiver options, but they're going much earlier in drafts than Allen Robinson. When it comes to targeting wide receivers, we always want to target wide receivers that are getting consistent volume in their offense. So for Allen Robinson to receive 150 plus targets in each of the past 2 seasons, despite the trouble that this team has had offensively and trying to find their solution at quarterback, really goes a long way in showing you how important Allen Robinson is and how much of a key contributor he is for this offense. Believe it or not, those target totals should not slow down whatsoever. The Chicago Bears over the past 3 seasons have actually finished in the top 15 when it comes to total pass opportunities, and with no receivers in the Chicago Bears offense really stepping up in a major way to prove themselves as the second best receiver in this offense, Allen Robinson's role as the key contributor and main contributor from the wide receiver position should remain once again for 2021. Now the final unfortunate part about drafting Allen Robinson is for the beginning of the season, he is going to be a bit limited while Andy Dalton is listed as the starter. Matt Nagy, unfortunately, throughout this offseason has made it very clear that no matter what happens with the development of rookie Justin Fields, this Chicago Bears team has been very open about being committed to Andy Dalton starting for this team for week 1. Don't get it mistaken though, talent does win out in the end, and if Andy Dalton ultimately is the best decision for this team to start at quarterback, then Andy Dalton will remain the starter. If Andy Dalton does struggle, then best believe they will make their way over to rookie Justin Fields. But despite how pessimistic one could be over the upcoming quarterback situation for the Chicago Bears, we already know from 2 years past that Allen Robinson can definitely produce despite the level of talent and play at the quarterback position throwing him the ball. We've already seen in years past Mitchell Trubisky having success targeting Allen Robinson, Nick Foles also having success targeting Allen Robinson, and those 2 quarterbacks from a talent perspective are much more in line with what we could expect from a quarterback like Andy Dalton, so we shouldn't expect a major drop off from there, and definitely brings in a bunch more upside if Justin Fields ends up getting the nod. Allen Robinson and where he's going in drafts, he's not required to do anything more than he's already done over each of the past 2 seasons, so Allen Robinson's actually coming into the 2021 season as a bit more safe of a wide receiving target than one would expect. Currently, Allen Robinson is coming off the board as the wide receiver 12, 5 spots spots lower than where he finished in the 2019 season, 3 spots lower than where he finished in 2020. So heading into 2019, we have him ranked as the wide receiver 9, making him one of the better values at the wide receiver position in the early rounds. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.